Coming up on Arirang News, with coronavirus cases coming down in recent weeks, South Korea decides to ease its social distancing measures. Certain kinds of businesses, like singing rooms, can reopen, but on a limited basis. The resurgence of cases that started in August took a toll on the local economy. The Korea Development Institute says industrial production, services, and construction were down by more than they were the month before. And in North Korea, Kim Jong-un is taking part in numerous events for the 75th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party, seemingly to shore up unity among the North Korean people facing continuous hardship. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korea continues to celebrate the 75th founding anniversary of its ruling Workers' Party. It's believed that the regime, and Kim Jong-un in particular, is doing so much for the anniversary to reinforce the North Korean people's loyalty to the regime under pressure from the pandemic, sanctions, and a failing economy. Kim Dami has the details.
Despite the regime's vigorous antivirus campaign, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Sunday attended a mass gymnastics shows in Pyongyang. Entitled Great Guidance, the event by tens of thousands of performers is seen as a major propaganda tool for the North, with a sharp focus on praise for its leaders. Kim, along with the regime's other top brass, wore no mask, and similar grand shows will reportedly run through the end of October. Watchers say the North is trying to solidify internal unity in the midst of the regime's struggles that include crushing international sanctions, the COVID-19 pandemic, and severe typhoon damage. On the same day, Kim held a photo session in front of the April 25 House of Culture with his top aides who attended Saturday's military parade that was also held to mark the party anniversary. While there, Kim expressed the expectation and belief that men of his revolutionary armed forces would remain boundlessly true to the regime. Kim's outwardly emotional speech at the military parade is also being seen as an effort to maintain stability and strengthen unity among the North Korean people. Unlike his previous speeches, Kim spent a large part of the address expressing gratitude and offering sympathy to the North Korean people over the regime's hardships and struggles. Watchers noted that Kim's rare public display of tears and his sincere apology indicate the level of internal pressure he's under. In August, Kim acknowledged that his 5-year economic development plan had failed to achieve its intended goals. He then pledged to come up with a new plan at a party congress set for January 2021. Other watchers see Kim's emotional speech as an attempt to portray himself as a compassionate global leader. Kim offered consolation to the world battling against the COVID-19 pandemic, including South Korea, hinting that the two Koreas could take each other's hand again when the health crisis is over. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
A series of public holidays in South Korea is now over, and with case numbers coming down, the authorities have eased the country's social distancing measures to level 1 for the country overall. That means singing rooms and private academies can reopen, and sporting events can have fans in the stadium on a limited basis. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The South Korean government has lowered its social distancing policy to level 1, the lowest on the country's 3-tier social distancing scheme. This comes as the average daily cases of COVID-19 have dropped to around 60 for the past 2 weeks, and as the virus reproduction rate has dropped below 1.
The government has taken into account the level of fatigue experienced by the public due to prolonged distancing measures and their negative effect on the economy.
Beginning Monday, gatherings of more than 50 people indoors and 100 people outdoors will be allowed. But restrictions apply for events with more than 100 people, limiting the capacity to 1 per 4 square meters. 10 high-risk facilities, including singing rooms and large-scale private academies, will be able to resume operations, but with limited number of people. As for professional sports events, fans will be admitted, but stadiums have to reduce their occupancy to 30% of capacity.
Mask wearing will be mandated for public transportation, rallies, and public venues. Starting November 13th, people who fail to wear masks will be subject to a penalty of around $85.
However, level 2 distancing measures will be in place partially throughout the greater capital area, in which the majority of the latest cases have been concentrated. Indoor gatherings of over 50 people and outdoor events of over 100 people will still be banned, while quarantine measures will be mandated for facilities deemed to have higher risks of infection, restaurants, wedding halls, and private academies. Eateries and coffee shops will have to keep a 1-meter distance between tables. Churches in the metropolitan area can convene in-person services with only 30% of their total capacity. A gathering ban will remain in place for door-to-door sales facilities and the promotional events they host, which have been one of the major sources of the latest outbreak. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The Seoul Metropolitan Office of Education has decided to give out emergency relief funds to support the education also of children who are not Korean citizens, in a change to its earlier policy. This will include more than 9,000 elementary and middle school students in the city whose parents will get either 150 or 200,000 won per child. That's about 130 to 175 US dollars. The larger amount being for the elementary school kids. The city had caused controversy with an earlier decision to give out relief money only for children with South Korean nationality. The funds are intended to help families now facing more child care costs with schools partially closed. New data show that the Korean economy is still weak because of the local resurgence of COVID-19 that started in August. The Korea Development Institute said in a report Monday that overall industrial production for August dropped 3.4% on year. The service sector fell almost 4% and construction was down 9.4%. All of those figures are worse than the month before. The KDI did point to some bright spots, however, in exports, which saw a sharp increase in September based on cars and semiconductors. Sentiment among exporting companies also suggests they expect the recovery to continue. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks on Wall Street closed higher last Friday on the hope that there'll be a stimulus deal. Korean stocks today much the same, up for an 8th session in a row. What's the story in the markets today?
Okay, well, as you mentioned, the U.S. stock markets, Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ, all have they have a bit of an up and down, but still generally on an upward trend, and it seems to be tied to the stimulus negotiations. Right now, the stimulus negotiations is sort of a three-way tug and pull. It's a fight between Republican Senate, Democratic House, and President Trump. Right now, President Trump and the Democrats are negotiating on the stimulus itself. President Trump is offering $1.8 trillion, but in various tweets and various interviews, he says that he's willing to go much higher. Now, Democrats want $2.2 trillion, but the Republican Senate is balking at both of these bills. They say that anything above $1 trillion is too high, and they're pointing out the concerns about the deficit, but then the Democrats are counterattacking that much of the deficit is due to President Trump's tax cuts last year, which right now it seems like it did not do any good in helping the U.S. economy last year and earlier this year, and of course, the problem was worsened by the coronavirus. Now, the problem between the Democrats and the President Trump is that, well, the Democrats have, I think, two big problems. One is that they say that President Trump wants very little supervision on how the money is spent, and they have recollections on how President Trump sometimes channeled this money to his close friends or his supporters. And then the second point that they are worried about is that President Trump is not very excited about giving money to state governments because, well, President Trump is claiming that the state governments will use this money not for filling up the budget that was spent on the coronavirus, but using the money for the state's long-term problems like pension shortfalls. So President Trump is very reluctant to increase the spending going to the state governments. The Democrats are pointing out that, first of all, that is not completely true. And second, if the support for the state governments are not given, then the state government employees, including police, firemen, and teachers, will be laid off very soon. Now, because this spending negotiations is going a bunch of tug and flow, and there's also political calculations on all three sides, not wanting to let the other side seem to have a win before the election. It's going to be a very unstable type of negotiations, and that's going to probably be reflected in the U.S. stock markets. Now, European stock markets, they're rising mildly, but it hasn't recovered to previous highs of mid-September, and recoveries for them seems to be getting further and further off because of the rise in COVID virus. Shanghai, there was a sharp rise at the end of last week because China has some good news. Their economy is expected to rise by 1.1%, and their economy is the only major economy that's going to experience positive growth this year. Japan, their Nikkei is falling Friday and today. They have a fear of deflation. Kospi and Kosdaq, as you mentioned, they seem to be following the U.S. markets. They're rising slowly, but they're not reaching the highs that they had in the mid-September.
Well, also down from the highs we saw in early September, the won-dollar exchange rate has come down dramatically since then. We're under 11.51 to the dollar now. Just a month ago, it was around 11.90. What's happening with the exchange rate, and where do you see it going?
Okay, well, usually if the $1 rate changed this much, it was due to international investors investing in Korean securities, whether it be stock or bonds. But for the last month or so, the international investors have been selling stocks and bonds, so that does not seem to be the culprit. The market analysts are saying that the culprit is actually the strengthening of the Chinese yuan. For the last couple of years, Korean won has been very highly correlated with the Chinese yuan, and because the Chinese yuan has been strengthening since May from 7.2 yuan per dollar to 6.7 yuan per dollar, and because the global situation, while it's not good, it seems to be stabilizing, so the U.S. dollar is weakening. And Chinese economy, as mentioned, is the only major economy expected to have a positive growth. The Chinese yuan seems to be rising, and Korean won is following yuan upwards. But there has been some news that the People's Bank of China has made it easier to bet against the yuan at the end of last week. That was partially the reason why the yuan market has suddenly done well in the last couple of days. And if the People's Bank of China's measure works and the yuan weakens, then Korean won may weaken as well.
Well, it's the start of a new week, Professor. What's on your radar in the days ahead? We're almost out of time.
Okay, well, the Korean September employment figures will be interesting. Financial market trends will be interesting. And then the United States will reveal consumer price index, inflation, and retail sales. That'll show whether the U.S. is going to recover or whether it'll go deeper into a slowdown.
Got it. All right, Professor Yang Jun-suk, thank you for that. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Now, in the pandemic, untold millions of people around the world have lost their jobs. Tenants have been unable to pay rent, and homeowners their mortgages. In the global financial crisis a decade ago, home prices fell by an average of 10% around the world, but this time they're still rising. Ji-young has more.
Despite a global recession triggered by COVID-19, house prices in most middle and high-income countries keep rising. UK mortgage lenders say that the average price of a house in Britain hit an all-time high in September of around $325,000, up roughly 7% on year.
The amount of transactions increased by about 70 to 80% in the short term.
It is driven by pent-up demand following lockdowns, a record low interest rate, and a temporary cut in property acquisition tax. Analysts say more people working from home amid the pandemic was also behind the price increase.
As more people stay home longer as they work from home, many are reconsidering where to live as they get more interested in improving their living environment.
U.S. home sales also soared to a 14-year high in August, with the median price for all housing types at around $310,000, driven by record low interest rates. Other major economies also saw house price rise compared to the same period last year, with Germany posting a 6.8% hike in the second quarter. South Korea's property prices increased 1.3% on year. However, for Seoul alone, the average price of an apartment unit stood at over $735,000, up about 5.5% on year. The average price of a flat in the popular Gangnam-gu district was around $1.5 million. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Now, the pandemic has made people shop more online, of course, and less in the stores. So to help the fashion industry get eyes on their new products, the city of Seoul is working with Naver Shopping Live to hold a virtual fashion show. The fall-winter collections of a range of brands will be featured this Wednesday, October 14th at 8 p.m. and then again 2 weeks later on the 28th. The designers will be on the show with the host to talk about their pieces as well. Seoul is also planning to hold online fashion shows at least twice more in November and December. To find out more, search online for Seoul 365 Fashion Show. And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.